Right. Good afternoon and welcome. 2 o'clock. I normally go by my iPhone actually, and it is 2 o'clock, so there we go. Saved. Welcome to today's meeting of the Police and Crime Panel, which is being webcast live to the public. For those not able to watch the footage live, the webcast will be available for viewing on the County Council's website after the meeting. Please can I remind members to switch their microphone on when speaking and to turn it off when they have finished speaking. Declarations of interest. Mr. Culverwell and Ms. Lalani both have standing declarations of interest. Does anyone else have any other thing wish they to declare? Nope. I think for the first time for a long while we don't have any apologies either. So that's good news. That's good news. So moving to the agenda, we have minutes of the meeting held on the 22nd of July. Just to remind members, I wasn't there myself, but we will go through the pages one by one. Although there's no separate items for matters arising, I will take matters arising. So like I say, page by page. Page 3. Michael.
For the correction, I'm sorry.
Do you want to go first then?
Yeah, it should say City Hall, Leicester, not County Hall, Glenfield. That's just an error.
Okay, thank you very much. Nothing else on page 3. Page 4. Michael.
Thank you, Chair. Just to see if there's an update on whether the information is available about the length of calls compared to the length of calls in other counties.
I think you'll find in the course of the meeting the Chief Constable will talk about that issue along with others, if that's okay, Michael, for the moment.
Page 5. Page 6. And page 7. Kevin.
Thank you, Chairman. It's page 7 itself, item C. I think it's the last sentence, which talks about the Police and Crime Panel will write to the Police Minister to support the funding being continued beyond March 2020. Does that mean that have we done that, or is it on hold for the time being? Thank you.
Thank you through you, Chair. Thank you, Kevin, for asking that. I wanted to say something about that. We're extremely grateful to the panel for its offer last time. We've discussed it. We had a visit from the Home Office after they'd granted us the money and sent it for this year. And we asked, obviously, about funding in future years. Without going into any detail, from that response, we would be very grateful if you wouldn't mind holding off for a short while from that letter, from sending it. It may be that it doesn't need to be sent, but if it does, I will contact the chair and ask you to send it. But for the moment, we think it would be better not to send it, and that sounds reasonably optimistic. But if that optimism isn't based on fact, then we'll certainly want you to write the letter, please.
Thanks very much, Kevin. Slightly on a tangent, but there is a district leaders meeting in the morning at Oby in Wigston, actually, and I have a feeling this is going to pop up there, this issue. So we'll see, but that's another matter. That's just for reference, though. But we'll certainly take your advice, Lord Mark. Thank you very much. On to item 2, public question time. I haven't been told any at all. No. Item 3, to advise of any other items which the Chairman has decided to take as urgent. I haven't been notified of anything, but I'm always interested to listen to anything, but doesn't look like there's anything at all. Number 4, declaration of interest in respect of items on the agenda. I haven't at all. No one else? No. Moving on to the meat of the meeting then. Police and Crime Commissioner's Annual Report, page 9 to 52. Lord Bark.
Thank you very much, Chair. And first of all, I want to thank my office and the police too, because they obviously look at this as well, for the help that they've given in preparing this annual report. I know it's fairly lengthy, and I'm sure that those all members of the committee will have, of the board will have read its main parts, if not the whole document, and obviously happy to answer questions on it. I don't intend to be very long in opening it because I think it really speaks for itself, but one or two things I'd like to say. It's the third annual report. In fact, there's a slight error in paragraph 2 of the front. It should be the 1st April 2018 to 31st March 19. Could just change, that could just be altered. So the report starts, which has to be published by law, obviously won't be in this form. It's going to be published as a document, and you can begin to see how it will look in colour and the rest of it. Covers a whole range of issues that affects me and my job, and obviously the office too. The Commissioner's view, which is really an introduction, speaks for itself, and obviously I'll answer any questions about that too. And I'm going to go from the page number on this report, the bottom of the page. They're two quite contrasting numbers. So this is page 5 about Leicestershire Police, and the role of the Police and Crime Commissioners set out in law. And then we come to how the rest of the annual report is set out, based on the 5 key areas that are set out in the Police and Crime Plan, under the general heading of prevention, of course. So with viable partnerships, which starts at page 7, as I say, I think it speaks very much for itself. Seeing if there were any particular points I wanted to raise in it. It's an outline of what we've done in partnership. It's an absolutely crucial part of my office's role to work in close partnership with all the other public services that there are, doing their best to prevent crime. I'm taking you through now to the examples on page 11 from CSPs. Blaby and Hinckley and Bosworth have been picked out. Quite clearly, those two authorities who have combined in many ways as far as CSP is concerned, doing some really excellent work, as are other CSPs, as I know. But I think those examples are good examples of what they do. I'm not going to say anything more on that part of the report. I turn to visible policing. And I would like to take you to page 17, the second paragraph, this peer educator scheme working with young people in our communities. This is an exciting scheme where young people who are trained go out, they wear something on top of them so they can be identified, and their role is to go into areas where secondary schools, for example, finishing for the day, where there's a prospect that there may have potentially be some trouble, and they make friends, for want of a better word. They make contact, I think is a better expression, with young people. And this is a scheme that we'll have to see how it works in practice. It's a lovely idea, but I think it works pretty well in practice. And I think this is a really original idea that's hopefully going to mean that it's not kind of oldies telling young people what to do, but making a communication to suggest there are other things in life to do after school other than stand on a street corner, or even worse. See what I mean? So I want to draw your attention to that. Under the next section, zero tolerance to supply of Class A drugs, the second paragraph on that heading, under that heading, Operation Lionheart. Chair, the board has heard about Operation Lionheart before, but it was a great success. And the thing I like most about it, of course, that the criminals, serious criminals, are caught and are dealt with by the courts if they're convicted, but actually that the public who live in the areas where the criminals were carrying out their offences are so pleased and delighted that at last they're free of these people for who knows. Even if they don't go to prison, they've been reminded, but if they go to prison, they're free of what they've been doing. And communities really suffer if they've got serious criminals in them, it seems to me. So I want to draw attention to that. Page 18, third paragraph from the bottom. The Force's pioneering digital media investigator, first prize in innovation in digital investigation and intelligence category at an international awards event. Digital is the future. I mean, what the Force is doing as far as digital is concerned, I've been able to provide some cash, I think, that helps with this, but if you're going to be successful in a modern police force, you have to become more digital, and I think Leicestershire have a very good record on that. The point about criminality and harm at the top of page 15 is one that I know this board understands. And then you'll see figures around police officers. I want to just mention one figure. This paragraph, at the figures at the bottom of that page, page 15, talk about police officers in the top column, 1782, 1751, 1792. Has everyone got that? That actually is were the actual numbers rather than the establishment figure. There wasn't a drop. In fact, that was the real number in that year, but you can see that it's advanced, and obviously this year, and with the government announcement, that figure will go up and up, hopefully, in the years ahead. I'm delighted to say, under knife crime on page 16, the catastrophic hemorrhage packs. I'm very grateful to EMAS for this. Last week we took possession of those, and I think they will be a great addition to frontline police cars in the future and will save lives. I'm moving on as fast as I can. The issue about rural crime, page 19, work that the Chief does, which I support completely in that area. And then I take you to page 21 at the bottom. Responding to demand. It's only a short paragraph, and you will hear more about this at future meetings. This is a change of how incidents are dealt with, and the new operating model that is not yet finally decided, but is at quite an advanced stage, which returns to neighbourhood-based omnicompetent police officers. This is a kind of trailer for that, because I'm sure, Chair, you will want to have a proper discussion about that at the appropriate time. But this is an exciting change, and I'm actually very much in favour of it as a way forward. I turn to victim services, which is next. And all I really want to say here is to add to the report, which was obviously written a few months ago. There are going to be some open days coming up for victims, police stations and other places. The whole aim is to make victims feel as though they actually matter in the system. And I think there's been quite a lot of progress, not just here, but nationally on that issue. Still a long way to go. Vulnerability protection. Everyone knows that vulnerability is really at the heart of what the police do, and I consider it to be an absolute priority. You see the first sentence, the initiatives to ensure that some of the most vulnerable members of society are able to be more resilient in the face of adversity. And I use substance misuse treatment service in particular, and forgive me if I tell a little story. The Turning Point, who have the contract at the moment, or one of the contracts, held an award ceremony a couple of weeks ago for their new peer mentors. I don't think I knew what a peer mentor was 2 years ago, but I know now. These were people who had been, who were guilty, as it were, of substance abuse and alcohol abuse, They were ill with those illnesses. And these are people who had not only recovered from that, but actually going on to go through training in order to be able to try and help others recover from their illnesses too. And of all the events I've been to over the last 3.5 years, it was by far and away the most moving. These are people who had a real struggle to do what they've done, are so proud as their families are of what they've achieved. It seems to me this is a very worthwhile area. Those who, and of course the full-time professionals who are training these people as well, deserve huge credit. It's not an easy job to get out of being someone who's dependent on alcohol or dependent on drugs, to get out of it. And those who do, I think, should be very much praised. Right, moving on. You see the substance addiction paragraphs at page 28. You see the work that we're doing. I'm proud that my office gives a lot of money towards tackling substance misuse per year. There's hardly a crime where drugs don't appear somewhere in the margins, if not central to it. And there are many, many, many offences where alcohol clearly plays a part as well. And substance addiction is a huge problem for our society, it seems to me. I move on. The missing at home, draw people's attention to the missing at home paragraph at the end of this section. Then finally, value for money. There were all kinds of facts I didn't know about on page 33. But I like the fact that we're using, the police and us are using local suppliers for a variety of things. I think that's a good thing to be doing, and probably an environmentally friendly thing to be doing as well. Even in the canteen, renewable drinks cups, there you are. That's one of the great achievements, I think. And then turning on to the rest of that passage, and then at the top of page 36, Chair, just about to finish now, 6 meetings of the Police and Crime Panel last year. I'd like to take this opportunity of thanking you and the panel for the scrutiny you give us, for the work we try and do. And then finally, you will see the number of crimes recorded at the bottom of page 37. So I think you'll be able to tell what this will look like once it's published and printed and in colour. I'm very conscious that, you know, a large number of this document, which I have to produce, won't be read, may even end up in the waste paper basket. I'm quite conscious of that, but I do hope members of the board, if they approve of this, will help from their own lives get things into libraries, into local authorities, into GPs, surgeries. I think this is a story worth telling, good and bad as there is in it. And Chair, I'm more than happy to answer any questions that the panel will have, or any comments, listen to any comments they have.
Thank you, Lord Berk. First of all, members, Lord Berk's just like to point out he's using the numbers at the bottom of each page. So, for example, the Commissioner's view is obviously indicating that's page 3. So if we could make sure we do use the page numbers at the bottom for this one, otherwise we'll be all over the place if we're not nervous. The other thing is, this just to remind everyone, there's 15 of us on this panel. If we all ask a question and we all ask a supplementary on each report, I might not make the district meeting in the morning at 9 o'clock. So what I'm going to suggest is, the next bit is very serious actually. Ask the questions, as many questions as you want, but can we try and be economical in the way we ask the question? Be smart, and also can we be smart in the supplementary if there is one? That's all I do ask. We have Deborah. I'm going to go through page 2, number 14. I'm going to ask for any questions on page 3 and 4, Commissioner's view. Kevin.
Thank you, Chair. But it's a question related to page 3, but then it goes to page 15 because they're both linked. Is that possible, or do you want me to? Okay, thank you. First of all, I say it's an excellent report, and I have to thank the Office of Police and Crime Panel because Commissioner, because from a CSP point of view, the collaboration and the interaction between us has been far, far greater in these last years than it's ever been before in the enactment of the Police and Crime Commission anyway. And I welcome that most heartedly because it helps us to function and concentrate on what we're trying to achieve. First of all, I'll go to page 3, if I may, at the bottom, and then there's this second paragraph up, which talks about, thankfully, more officers in our neighbourhood policing teams in response to our views. In other words, it's suggesting that we've got more officers there, which then I link that, if I may, to page 15, at the box below. Is this where we've got the police officers, which I've calculated an increase of 41. Is that a result of the decision we made last year when we increased the precept to allow more police officers? And then secondly, the PCSOs, there has been a reduction of 61. Does that cancel one out or the other, or is it an increase, or is it just a change of priorities? Thank you.
What you said about working with you and other safety partnerships. As far as the PCSOs are concerned, I think the board knew that at the time before where there was any kind of chance of more money coming from central government to pay for police officers, that we had to make a decision, frankly, between getting rid of PCSOs or getting rid of police officers. And the decision was taken. It's not an easy one, clearly an operational decision, but I was asked my view that the PCSOs, it was a number that had to decline rather than police officers, because of the fact that PCSOs, who play an absolutely incredible part, really, really great part, just don't have the powers that police officers do in terms of crime. So that's why that figure went down. I'm glad to be able to say that the figure is going to be 181. It's not as many as we'd like, but that figure is going to stay as at that level. It won't go lower than that. If you press me, I'd say that was too low, but we absolutely need to make sure that we have more police officers if we can. So as far as this year's concerned, because this goes up to March, the end of March this year, as this year's budget's concerned, as I think the board knows, we've managed to find the resources by putting up the council tax, the precept, by a lot, and by using reserves. No, it is a lot. By reserves, 24 quid to be exact. And using the reserves, we're going to have 107 over an 18-month period. I think it's somewhere in these papers. It'll be about, Simon help me, it'll be about 80 or 90 this year, and the balance next year. Yep. In 20. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, 80 recruited this year, 27 coming in next year, 2021. So that 1792 is going to be increased to over 1900. And that is the way I hope we will go in the years to come. But I mean, who can forecast? Simon.
Okay. Simon. Sorry. Yes. Go on.
Yeah, I mean, just 3 points really. Just we relaunched recruiting for PCSOs on Monday, but it is based on we used to have 251. It's based on 181 because bluntly you have to make choices as the PCCs. The point about reserves, I'm slightly worried. Gets a bit lost sometimes in the discussions that we're all having. We are using reserves to maintain the levels of people we've got at the moment, and as we all know from our different roles, once you spent them, you spent them. And the other thing, just to get sort of out, so it saves someone asking it perhaps, we do not know at the moment our share of the 20,000. We know there is to be 20,000 or are to be 20,000. We do not know what our share of that is to be. The way the money has been announced, it looks like it means an extra 2,000 officers nationally by March need to be recruited. If that was pro rata, for us that would be somewhere between 30 and 40 on top of what's described on top of the page, page 27, or bottom of the page, page 15. But that's a professional estimate, so we don't know at the moment what the 20,000 will be. The other way the money's been released is there will be in total 6,000 extra, so another 4,000 on top by the following March, and again we don't know our share of that, and we then don't know what happens to the 14,000. So someone will ask it, you're quite right to ask it, but and it does affect things, and we had a quick discussion before about are we going to put more officers into Colville? At the moment I'd love to, but I don't know because I don't know what I'm getting. So I hope that helps, and that will impact on your question, you know, because that number, you know, we're heading to an establishment of 1915. That number is potentially going to get bigger, but I can't tell you by how much or over what timescale.
Thank you, Simon. Most helpful. Moving on then, I've lost it. So here we go to the police. So it's on page 5, what's called about Leicestershire Police, and in the index, Police and Crime Commissioner. I think there are anything on those 2 pages. If not, we move on quickly to page 7, viable partnerships. Any questions on viable partnerships? No? Okay, thank you very much, members. Moving on to visible policing, page 14. Deborah.
Sorry, it was in that section, so page 16. I just want to say that prevention is filtering all through your report, which is really good to see, because I think that's where the focus needs to be, on prevention rather than being reactive. Just at the bottom of page 16 about the red thread, I'm under the impression that's not going to be the case now, so that probably needs altering within the report if that's not going to go ahead.
Thank you, Deborah, very much. It is absolutely, we talked about it just before the meeting actually, and when Grace comes to talk about the violence reduction network, make it clear where that's got to. Okay, so that will have to go before the report is published.
Okay, members, anything else on visible policing? Moving on to victim services on page 21. Yep, oh sorry.
Just back on page 20 on the top, the antisocial behaviour, a decrease of 17.7%. Is that an actual decrease, or is that the way it's reported now?
People don't report ASB sometimes. I mean, let's be frank about it, they don't. But it does look over the years that there is, well, certainly a decrease in the numbers being reported. I think that's the best way of putting it. I think there are some parts of the city and county that suffer from almost constant ASB of one sort or another. People get too used to it. There are other parts of the other county and city where people complain very loudly, but actually they don't necessarily have even a 1/100th of the ASB that other parts have. That's my estimate. So what the number, how helpful the numbers are, I'm not absolutely certain, but people want figures. These are the figures. So I think there is a decrease, but I wouldn't like to put say much more than that.
Okay, Maronisa, are we on visible policing or victim services?
I think it was on. It's page 17.
Page 17.
Yeah. Can I just make just a general observation about the report and just say that it's really well written, but what I particularly welcome, if it's going to be published, is the pictorials that you have,
Yes.
which align themselves to the plan, the Police and Crime Commissioner's plan. I think those are really helpful because they give you kind of the key facts, so people don't have to read the rest of the report, but they can see the key figures. So that's really welcome, I think, and should be included in any reports anyone does, those pictorials. What I was really interested, and I think it's interesting, isn't it? This goes back to the heart of prevention, and it's been really helpful, but also really welcome, the focus around prevention, is the aspect around peer educators. I mean, it's the first time I'm hearing about that. What would be really helpful is maybe in the future to tell us more about that scheme, but not only about that scheme, you also mentioned peer mentoring elsewhere, is to say actually what that's doing and how does that reduce both crime, but probably even violent crime in the future. So I think it'd be really helpful to have something around that in the future as well. The other area that I'd be really interested if you could bring is that you're funding a lot of initiatives. You're funding a lot of initiatives, is to look at how then do you measure the impact. I think it's really important. I know it's really difficult, but it'd be really useful to look at how do you measure impact and what difference that's made in terms of crime across the county and the city.
Thank you very much. I'll take up all those points. Absolutely. I think the board would be interested in perhaps hearing from one of these organisations or one or two of the organisations that we actually give public money to, so they can be asked questions about it. The one about mentors is absolutely right. Make the point. I sort of made it all the way along. It's really hard to judge whether something's a success or not. I know that's a kind of cop-out in a way, but sometimes people looking for outcomes which aren't ever really, you can't really work them out. It'd be lovely if they could. You could say, well, we put that in and that meant that there was that less offending. But we'll do our best. I think it's a fair point.
Just a really quick supplementary. One of the things you could look at, I think, Lord Back, is you talked about crime in communities and how those communities then feel in terms of safety. And maybe where you're focusing some of these initiatives is to look at what's happening around that area. Has there been any change?
Okay.
It may be difficult, but it could be something that you could measure.
Thank you.
Thanks, Moniza. Michael.
Thank you, Chair. Just a comment, really. I think the whole report is very well written. And going on to the peer mentors, those of us that were lucky enough to actually listen to Niv and Rennie, we actually saw how the peer mentors actually had a vast interest and a result. And I don't think until you've walked in someone else's shoes, you can't actually know what they've gone through. And so actually involving these people in educating other people how to get out of those situations absolutely is vital and valuable. So well done.
Okay, members, is anything else on visible policing at all before we move? It's actually page 23, victim services. If not, we move on to victim services, page 23. Any questions, members? No. Move on to vulnerability protection on page, nearly said 38, page 26. Thank you, members. Moving on to value for money, page 32. And that brings us to the end. Are there any other questions? Elaine, I thought there must be one somewhere. Yeah.
It's not really a question, it's more a comment to Lord Back and the team. I was really impressed with the report, and one of the things that I really like about it, and I think it's a very positive way forward, is the whole notion of that joined up working and working with other agencies, including young people as well. I think it's just brilliant, and I'm really looking forward to see how all this turns out. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that comment. That's kind of you. I want one myth I think must be got rid of straight away. I did not write the excellent English that this report is written in. I've got to say that, because I think there probably were a couple of authors, one in particular who's actually sitting at the back of the room, and I think it's quite important just to get that across.
Well, thank you very much, Lord Barr. I mean, to myself, it's an excellent report, actually. It's very comprehensive, and I think we can tell by the few amounts of questions we've had, members are satisfied with what's there, full stop, and I think that's all we can say. So congratulations to you, congratulations to the office. As we know, there's always more to be done. We all know that. We can never, this is certainly not a say, hey, Lord Bart, you've done well, sit back now. It's, urge you, well done so far, but let's keep the battle going. As someone who works in the countryside, very pleased to see the paragraph on rural crime. As we've seen on BBC News of late, it does seem to be under great pressure now. The vulnerability of people in the rural areas is just there to be seen. The lodges around my villages, they struggle a little bit with machinery theft, and then also the really annoying theft when someone goes and steals your spanners and things like that, because they're stealing your livelihood, and that really hurts. That does. Maybe small, never make the headline in the Leicester Mercury or Radio Leicester, someone's spanners being sold. But I might do, well, you never know. But it's taking away someone's livelihood, maybe for a couple of weeks or so. And so the cost of it's tremendous, there's no doubt about that. Members, we obviate to note the report, and I suspect you're all happy to do that. But following this meeting, you and myself will put a letter together, which we will send to Lord Berk's office, and then he will respond. Am I right on that one?
Yeah.
So, so if you look at the recommendations on page 9, item it does say to discuss, provide comments to the 1819 annual report of the Police and Crime Commissioner for the period 1st of April 18 to 31st of March 19. So all okay to note the report? Okay, and obviously we'll let all members have a copy of the letter that goes to Lord Berk when he goes, but you will find that popping up on the PCC's website. So back to the agenda, we go to agenda item 6, Leicestershire Police Performance Report, pages 53 to 70. Lord Berk.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I'm going to introduce this one really quickly. I'm delighted that Chief Constable was able to come today. I know he's had an extremely busy time in the last 48 hours, 72 hours or so, but very grateful that he's come to talk to this report as well. As you can see, this is kind of work in progress. We're changing the way in which performance reports come to you and are anyway produced. So it's not the finished article by a long way, but I think there will be matters here of interest to the board, and we look forward to hearing what comments and questions you have on the report. If Simon doesn't mind, I'm going to pass on to him as quickly as that.
Just before Simon starts, Ewan and I were, I think, privileged in one way. We met Elizabeth Starr, didn't we, just before Christmas, I remember, who took us through the new formats. And is Elizabeth here? She isn't, is she?
She's not.
No,
She's actually on leave at the moment.
I'm
going
standing
back.
in for her. Chair.
Yes, Simon's the new busy.
It's my finest hour.
If the press wasn't here, I could answer that, Simon. But yeah, please pass our thanks to Elizabeth because she has listened. Over to you, Simon.
Yeah, I mean, these are headlines, and one of the challenges for us is always what the numbers mean and what do the trends mean. I was tempted to say into your earlier question, if anything's gone down, it's brilliant policing and partnership work. If anything's gone up, it's probably about the way it's recorded. I hope that explains anything in the paper. And I'll conclude. No, wait.
Do you want questions on the way through, Simon?
Well, what I was
what's the
I'll
best
just
way?
do a headline from each, and then if people want to ask,
Okay.
Chair, I'll be guided by you.
Okay.
So I'll try and do it in chunks.
You do a headline on each page,
Yeah.
page, and then if I can encourage those smart questions
Yeah.
at that point.
Yeah, okay. And just a context so people are reassured in terms of, operationally, we have daily tasking, we have fortnightly tasking, we have monthly tasking, and then we have a performance overlay. So we have a forced performance meeting, which is attended usually personally by the Police and Crime Commissioner, and certainly always he's represented at it. And then the different bits of the organisation would all have their own bits of performance, because I think one of the challenges of this is how do you take antisocial behaviour and counter-terrorism and distill it into 10 pages for you? There are some quite different challenges within there. And in all of it, what we're trying to do is mitigate threat, harm and risk. And the point's already been made that, this is a sort of work in progress, and this format will change. And we've also brought into some new technology that will enable us to produce the data, I hope, in a more meaningful way. And the context for us always would be somewhere between 60 and 70% of the calls that we get don't finish up being about a crime or something that is recorded as a crime by crime recording rules. So if I start in the appendices, Contact management, I mean, the story really is that the volume of 999 calls grows. We're very quick to answer 999 calls. 92%, just shy of them, are answered within 10 seconds. And as you can see from the paper, that has gone up. Very low abandonment rate, and abandonment for emergency and non-emergency calls, is for a variety of reasons, and we'll get to non-emergency in a second. So 999 performance, numbers of calls going up. We will always prioritise them, and I'm just very aware. The chair's gone for a walk, the vice chair. I'm very aware that in the past the panel came and had a look, and I think there's been quite a turnover in the panel. And just so, if you want to come and have another look, you would be very. Is it sorted?
I think it's the 23rd of October it's arranged for, so about half the panel are going to be coming for another visit.
Okay. Non-emergency, we're seeing fewer calls. Our pickup rate around those is about 62% of those calls are being picked up in 30 seconds. We do have an issue, and there's a chunk of calls that are being abandoned or not answered. Average pickup time at the moment, 1 minute 29 seconds for a non-emergency line. And the other thing that we're seeing, and the paper alludes to, is a move towards online reporting. So paragraph 1.4, and it's been mentioned in the Commissioner's report, we are seeing a pickup in online reporting, which really is being found by people. We've not particularly sort of pushed that. We've gone into a national way of doing that, which I should declare I'm the person responsible for nationally. So there are 17 forces on that at the moment. We've gone, and people are just finding it, so they're just Googling, or other search engines are available, report a crime in Leicestershire, and it's taking them into that. And you can see those numbers are sort of slowly lifting up. So contact management, the story is 999 performance very strong, non-emergency performance pretty good actually. 62% of calls answered within 30 seconds, but still some work to do around some of the calls that are unanswered, which we're obviously doing. So I'll pause there, Chair. Okay. Incidents. So.
Thank you. Is that okay? Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah. Page 57, if I may.
Yeah.
1.4.
Yeah.
We talk about the reduction of the 101 calls, which is quite significant. But then it goes on to talk about, in part, there's an increase in crime reporting online. Do we have any figures about that? Is that consistent, or is it lower, higher?
The figures at the bottom of 1.4 are what is being reported online at the moment. And considering that a year ago that figure would have been pretty much zero, and in the context of 90-something thousand crimes a year, it's starting to grow. The other thing that we're finding people are reporting on there, and if members of the panel haven't had a look, please do have a look at what's on there. Road traffic incidents, we're seeing a real increase in reporting. It's a map-based system, so you can click on the map, something happened here. We're building on the ability to do some of the bureaucratic parts of firearms licensing, things like Clare's Law, disclosing around partners and the like are all on there. So the intent is that it builds up a sort of set of things that people may want to transact online. So you can see the numbers are going up. One of the questions that we know, nationally, people using the national online reporting do get asked, why have you reported online? Have you reported online because it's your first choice? Have you reported because you haven't been able to get it through another way? So we'll build that up, but we're only 2 or 3 months in, so the data doesn't really tell us much at this point, but we will get that as it goes forward to try and answer that question. Because if it's your first choice, which it will be for some people, then it's great. If you've got on there because you've given up other ways, it's not so good, is it? So we would, but I couldn't. There's no meaningful data at the moment.
Just a comment, Simon. As CSP chair for Harbour, it's a standing order on our newsletter that goes out about online reporting, and I assume most of the Yeah, the same do. And I think that's helped to actually increase the online reporting.
Yeah.
Kevin and Andrew.
Can I move on to page 61? Is that?
I hadn't got there yet.
Yeah,
Chair.
got it. Okay, I'll wait. Sorry, ahead of myself.
Yeah, so it was just point on 1.3. Do you have any idea how many of the 999 calls are actually non-emergency? And is there any kind of trend with that?
Gosh. Not in an empirical way. There are not lots and lots of calls coming on the 9s that aren't emergencies, but there are some, and some of them, frankly, are rather bizarre. And, we do try and use the local media to tell some of those stories on occasion. Equally, we get stuff on the non-emergency line that really should have come in on it. Well, in my previous force, I was involved in bringing in the non-emergency line, and the very first call that came in was, I'm in my kitchen and it's on fire. Now, my marketing team took great credit that under that kind of pressure someone could remember a non-emergency number, but you would have excused that person for dialing 999, wouldn't you really? So, I mean, we don't have empirical evidence. I mean, one of the issues for us through all of this data is some of the calls that come to us probably aren't for us in the first place. I'm having a mental health crisis, there's a problem with noise, there's this and that and the other. So there's always a bit, and there's quite a lot of partnership working going on with districts, with the counties, with the city, and obviously with fire and ambulance as well, with whom we have a lot of kind of immediate exchange of info.
Okay, back to you then, on to the agenda, Simon.
Yeah, I mean, incidents, really, just so people understand, this is what gets turned into a log which we want to do something with. So a job is created which has to have some sort of resolution. Grade 1 is we're going to put blues and twos on and get there, so that's a crime in action or a life at risk. Grade 2 is something that we probably need to get there in a reasonable time, but it isn't an emergency, and so it wouldn't justify usually putting on blue lights and taking risks. 3 is we'll come and see you tomorrow at 2 o'clock, and 4 is that we deal with it on the telephone, so it's a reporting or something like that. I think we've already touched on ASB on the way through. I would highlight missing people at the top of page 59, and this is where my point about trends at the start. There is a reduction compared to this period last year, bearing in mind that last year our reports of missing people went up 16%. So we're now dealing with 5,000 missing people, and I was on call over the weekend, as has been alluded to. It was pretty full on this weekend, but one of the reasons where there were a number of high-risk missing people, and I do think there is a bit of joined-up work for the force with the OPCC and with partners to do around who is represented within those missing groups, because generalising, you've got a number of people who have ill health and are a risk to themselves. You have a number of perhaps more elderly people who have got diagnoses such as Alzheimer's and the like, and then young people, and young people in care are disproportionately represented in those sections of young people. So, we are finding that our numbers of missing people have gone up. For those newer members, we actually created a missing person team about 2 years ago, I think, from memory, because the number of those people who are repeats and for whom we need to have a more meaningful response than sending the next cop to go. So, there needs to be a more partnership problem-solving approach. So I would just highlight that, and you can see the kind of demographic breakdown there. And that's that chunk, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Just thinking laterally, Simon, and it actually rolls back into call response as far as dial in. Does the system have the capability to acknowledge and those that are mega high risk? And absolutely. So if that abused mum rings in, she leapfrogs up that 999 section. And it kind of just fits into what you were just saying about how you actually prioritise, but actually can you prioritise the priorities, if that makes sense? So the technology can do it, it just needs to register that. That's the phone number that we've attached a mega high risk to, and therefore it leapfrogs right up the treble 9 response handling.
We would probably do that in a different way. I mean, 999 call will always be prioritised. If we assess somebody is at a particular risk, we will give them another way of doing that. So if we've got, and you used a domestic abuse incident as an example, if we have somebody we think is particularly at risk of domestic abuse, then we will give them the ability to contact us in a way that doesn't, because I mean, one of the things that's, and you'll see when you come in, I mean, and I've used this example in the panel before, so those that heard me before, please excuse me. The year before last, there was a particular day when our 999 performance dropped really badly, and the sort of drop that makes the chief get quite grumpy at what's happened. Someone was riding their bicycle the wrong way down the hard shoulder of the M1, and everybody who went past them dialed 999, quite rightly, to tell us. Yeah, every phone lights up, and at our end we're saying, thank you very much, we know. Thank you very much, we know, after we've had the first couple of reports that triangulate it. So there is a thing about, you know, peaks and troughs, and you will be aware as a panel of some of the really difficult things that we've dealt with. You know, Hinckley Road happens, we get a lot of 999 calls. King Power crash, we get a lot of 999 calls. So there's a sort of thing about having a system that can cope, but we do put a wrap around people who are at particular risk.
Okay, Melanie and then Alan.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at the incidents, again, this is for my clarity. Maybe I'm just probably reading this in a very simple way. So if I look at 2.1,
Yeah.
then these are some of the more, what I would class as serious incidents. They've actually gone down. I know it's very small numbers, so you're looking at 10% and then you're looking at 3%. So then I would say that actually you're doing pretty well as a force. And I would also say serious incidents are down, serious crime is down. I know we're just talking about the quarter. So I suppose that my question here is, I just want to understand what these figures are. Is it that these incidents, as I class them as serious incidents, so the 15-minute and the attendance in 2 hours, is it something that's a decision that's been made once the call comes in? You know, what happens here? And obviously it's down, so what can I take from this? If I was a member of public, what do I read from this?
I think that's a really fair question, and I mean, I think the answer you can take is that in the last quarter, compared to the same period the last time, there were fewer Grade 1 calls. But what science you could put around that? I mean, we would say that lots of the preventative work we hope has an outcome. You could say, I mean, if you compare this day compared to this day last year, it's poured with rain most of today. I would guess that our call volume is down compared to the day last year. You know, I don't want to do ourselves a disservice. What happens when a call comes in is the call taker takes the call and they are looking at the call for the threat, the harm, the risk, the investigative opportunities, the vulnerability of the caller, and whether there's any sort of community engagement need or, you know, it's a significant thing. That's what they're making the assessment on. So, you know, my neighbours are being burgled is a Grade 1 call, you know, and we'll go straight out as a response now. My neighbours have been burgled, will be probably in the 2-hour bucket because it's happened. So that is the assessment. It is a judgment call made by a human being who's a really well-trained human being, and it's their job, but that's what it tells you, really. And I think you're right to, I mean, Lord Blacker said it earlier, you know, reported crime is what people tell us about. Reported ASB is what people tell us about. It's not the same as what's happening. And later on, I think we touch on hate crime and stuff. As well as what is reported as a hate crime, we've got all the anonymised reporting and our reach out to different groups to get a sense of, so what's happening that isn't reported? Because not everyone wants to report things. If you look at the Crime Survey of England and Wales, it gives you a suggestion of percentages of who reports what. So people who've been burgled, 90-odd% will report. Criminal damage, 30-odd%. So what does this tell us? It tells us that many people phoned us and our judgment was used too. I don't think we've changed those decision-making processes. In recent times, it's not a kind of thing that's about we've changed the thresholds at all. It just tells us, and you know, I mean, 3%, I'm not good at maths, I'm not sure it's statistically significant. And of course, the other thing it tells us, Hinckley Road was one incident. it was lots of phone calls, but it was one incident, and it was one incident that probably you could argue the repercussions are still lasting now, but certainly lasted in terms of an emergency response a very long time, and then a community response a very long time. One incident. So it gives you a headline about the volume that we're trying to deal with, and for us, we're clearly trying to match our resources. So if you've got that many grade ones, how many people do you need on response who can drive to get there quickly? But you're right to... I don't really skeptical about the data, because one of the challenges of police data is this is as good as your data gets. But what conclusions you can draw from it, which is why you need the longer term trends, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I don't want to take anything away from this. I know it's just a quarter, but it's an interesting one when somebody looks at it at a glance in terms of what do you take away from this. So it's kind of what I would call a positive trend. And if that's the way it went on for the next year, then you can really say there's something.
It is, but the obvious thing that happened last summer was there was that brief gilded moment when we thought it was coming home. And that meant that we had some quite lively evenings where we had half the force deployed, enjoying the celebrations. And so the obvious comparator is, across the summer of last year, there was a World Cup, which attracted all sorts of issues and probably increased our call volume.
Okay, thank you very much, Veronisa. I'm going to take Alan, then Ivan, then I'm going to suggest we move over to Section 3 crime.
Going back to the missing persons, and particularly the under 18s, which is on page 59, I welcome the fact that the force recognises the disproportionate number of persons who are in care, and also that it's taking note of those who are repeatedly going missing. However, at what point might it be possible to give us some kind of analysis of that, so that certainly those of us from authorities where we have this responsibility can get a better understanding of exactly what is happening, so that authorities themselves can start to worry about how to put something in place. I'm aware that the children have return home interviews, or should, but I'm not sure that members of councils actually get to know this sort of thing.
I mean, two things. On a day-to-day basis, that should be happening with practitioners from the force and practitioners from the councils, but I will make sure we capture that in a report and feed it back for members' attention, because if you look, looked after children present some of, they have some of the biggest risks and vulnerabilities of any of the communities that we're all trying to look after. You were present, a number of you were present for the presentation from the Scottish Violence Reduction Unit. I'm desperately trying to remember their figure. Wasn't it 1% of children are in care in Scotland, and 60% of the population in prisons have been in care? Now that was Scotland's figure. So these are, when we're talking about county lines, when we're talking about vulnerable people, these are potentially amongst the most vulnerable people. So I'm very happy to do a breakdown and get it. I'll send it in to you, and if I may.
Ivan.
Thank you, Chair. And my question is on the same theme, because at the moment I'm told the figure for missing, but it doesn't distinguish between local authorities who placed children in the county, which is over 600, and is a higher figure than in fact we have in care in the county. And equally, we place children from the county in other authorities. Frequently, there's a good cross-trade between ourselves and the city. And I do think that from a helping you viewpoint, if we knew that, hypothetically, an out of East Midlands authority had a young person going missing regularly, that needs to be followed through either by the chairs of the Safeguarding Board or by the relevant lead members.
I agree.
Okay. Lord Bart, have you got a comment there to add? I wasn't totally sure.
No,
No.
No, and then I'm going to make a quick comment. It's the one that I know Ivan is particularly concerned with, and other people who work with Ivan, which is this issue of a kind of mismatch, I suspect, between the numbers that Leicestershire take in from outside to the numbers that Leicestershire actually pass on to other local authorities. And it's the role of the people the local authorities that put cared for children in Leicestershire when something goes wrong, and where they originally come from, whether they take their responsibility or not. But that's another issue. There's been questions in Parliament, and no doubt that's an issue, but I think it's linked to the missing persons issue.
Yeah, Ivan, then we'll move on.
On the return interview, members of the panel may not be aware of the fact that the frustration felt by the professionals involved is frequently very high when the young person refuses to participate. It just gets logged as there hasn't been a return interview. If you actually look at the difference between the figure of how many return interviews are offered as distinct from how many where the young person refuses to participate, you get a very different picture.
Thank you very much, Sir Ivan. Moving over to the page to the performance report, crime.
Yeah, just quickly, if I
yep,
can just
by all
build on
means,
Ivan's
Simon.
point, just there was an all-party parliamentary group report
Yes.
about 3 weeks ago, wasn't there, about exactly the issue that Ivan has just raised.
Absolutely.
So crime recording, you'll be aware that in a world where the HMI generally thinks quite positively of us, the only thing they don't think positively of us is our ability to accurately record crime, although we are getting better at it. So we see an increase in recorded crime, which is kind of in line with the rest of the forces in the country. We are still very focused on that because the crime recording audits that we had last year and the year before, the first one particularly just wasn't good enough. The second one we got much better. So you see an element of that being played through. And then, of course, you see within it as well crimes where we'd be seeking more reporting. So things like sexual offences and domestic abuse, where if we don't know it's happening, we can't do anything about it. So there's a whole set of things going on in there. And you can see the kind of trends. Violence without injury has gone up in terms of what's recorded compared to the previous year. It is quite a broad set of things. So common assault is the vast majority of it. So that's where somebody has been, I don't want to use the word technically, has been assaulted, but there isn't any injury. And then stalking and harassment and malicious communications all are included in there as well. So I have to say a chunk of that is linked to domestic abuse. And sometimes the way it's presented on the police.uk, which is the national data set, doesn't always, unless you drill into it, it doesn't make that always very clear. So knife crime, and sadly at the weekend, obviously one of the reasons that I had an interesting weekend was I was on call on Sunday morning, and by about 8 o'clock on Sunday morning we got what we thought were 2 murders in 2 different places. The second was not a murder, and it was a health episode which was dealt with after the post-mortem. Sadly we've had a murder which does appear to be knife crime related, and that investigation is ongoing in the city. Took place sort of on the edge of Highfields and the St Matthews estate. So we've been very active. Last week was OPSEPTA nationally, so we've had knife arches, we've had sessions in schools, we've had open area searches, we have been doing more stop and search in certain places as well, and we continue our work on habitual knife carriers and trying to make them make alternative choices. So some of the measure there about what we're recording is around more activity by us. And then as you can see, so we've been allocated various streams of money, and I think you're going to hear about violence reduction unit, so I don't want to sort of take all the oxygen out of that, but a considerable amount of money has been put in to the force, and you can see there around hotspots for prevention and enforcement, developing intelligence, our investigative response, and using technology as well. That's Home Office money, quarterly return to justify the spend, and the violence reduction unit you're going to talk about separately. We do see an increase in rape offences, and previously the panels asked particularly around how many of those are recent and how many are historic, and that sort of trend has continued in line with what we reported previously. Hate crime I've touched on, and there is a thing called Brexit coming up at the end of October, and our experience previously was there was some, maybe. I thought you were saying we've been prorogued. I don't know. Can you prorogue a panel? I don't know. So, you know, we will have a plan, and it's Hate Crime Week at the end of October, and amongst other things, there's a service in the Cathedral on the 23rd of October around hate crime, which people would be very welcome to attend, sort of late afternoon, early evening. Burglary, actually on a downward trend in general terms, and at the risk of making a point I've already made, on a typical day we'll go to 5 times as many domestic incidents as we'll go to burglaries, which is an interesting one. Drugs, I mean, we've touched on already, and child exploitation reporting. I don't think that's a significant thing as to why it's changed by so much, and we are putting more resource into it to try and bring it all together and have a sophisticated partnership approach.
Thanks very much, Simon. Alan.
Thank you, Chair. On that very drugs issue, is there any information, just a broad brush for us, of whether this is Class A or a particular type, or whether it's introductory drugs, as you might call them, such as cannabis? And the reason I use that expression is I wonder what the PCC's opinion is of cannabis. My opinion is that it's a gateway drug to more serious drugs, but speaking to someone in social work, a professional, I was told that it is a lifestyle choice. I wondered what the PCC's opinion is of that.
I'm rather old-fashioned about drugs generally, I fear. While I'm quite sure cannabis can be used for medicinal reasons and properly used, and I myself agree with you that it can be a gateway drug too. I don't think it's always a gateway drug, but it can be a gateway drug, and I suppose it depends on the kind of cannabis you're taking. I think the position we're in at the moment is that simple possession of cannabis, while still an offence, is not something that very often finds itself in court. But obviously possession with intent to supply does, and that remains a serious offence. So I think that works reasonably well at the moment. As to Class A drugs, which you didn't ask me about, I think, like most people, I'm completely opposed to any taking of Class A drugs. It's a very easy thing to say. They're the root of so much of what we're talking about of crime, wherever we are. I think there is a duty, and I'd say it's the first time I've said this because I'm rethinking this all the time. There is a duty on society to look at whether society's attitude towards drugs is the right attitude. But I'm a bit sceptical, I have to say, of decriminalising and then seeing what happens. So I'm open-minded now. I'm more open-minded than I have been for a long time about it. But I think these are very, very dangerous areas. It does seem to me that the commodity of crime basically now is drugs. Mostly Class A, can be Class B too. It's the commodity, it equals money. That's what it's about in the end. Certainly for the criminals, it's about money. And although this is a quite mixed up answer, it's something I've been thinking about a lot. I actually also have rather an old-fashioned, my wife calls me a Puritan on this, attitude towards alcohol. Which, of course, no one would ever... If people can take alcohol, which many can, most of us do, can, and behave in a civilised and proper way with alcohol inside, that's great. Those who want to reform drug policy would say, well, why can't they do that with soft drugs too? Take drugs, and I'm sure there are people who do, take cannabis, who live ordinary, civilised lives too. So, that contrast. But when you see, as I have and you have, people who've become victims of an illness by whether it's drugs or alcohol, there may be different consequences, but really it's the same thing. Lives are completely ruined by and it's very difficult to get people away from them. And I think that's responsible for a lot of low-level crime. And just about all high-level crime is around drugs. Nearly all violence crime now, serious violent crimes, about drugs. So it's huge problems for society. But I take a fairly old-fashioned view.
Thank you very much. Deborah, then Kevin, and then Elaine.
Just a very quick question on page 62 under 310 about the drug offences increased by 606. How many of those can we put down to Operation Lionheart? Do you know?
I had the piece of paper in my hand, which was just to point out on top of the page 29, we've just heard about Op Lionheart, which clearly was quite a focused operation dealing with drugs, and strangely in the first quarter of the year, at a time that lots of those results are coming through, we've got quite an increase in drugs. I mean, I couldn't give you a definitive number. I mean, we could work it out, and we know exactly the numbers of, you know, there's 130 odd people arrested off the top of my head for Up Lionheart. I couldn't do it off the top of my head now. And I suppose I just want to build on the point that the PCC's made, really. And I mean, I guess the answer for your question, Alan, is where you are. It is predominantly a more cannabis type world in your area, but that's not exclusively. I just yesterday afternoon and evening I spent time with our complex crime investigation team, and actually went on a real inquiry with her, which was interesting. My cover wasn't blown, you know, and they're doing a lot of work investigating pretty serious stuff, pretty complex stuff. I reckon 3/4 of it has a link to the drugs trade. And, you know, in recent months, we've seen, you know, somebody who got 25 years for discharging a firearm just in the middle of the city. That was about the drugs trade. You know, let us not fool ourselves. That drugs trade is linked to really serious and significant criminality, partly because it has a value and people need to protect the value. And one last point. I do think the point about cannabis, 31 years ago when I started policing, cannabis was not as strong as it is now. You know, it just wasn't. And it has been kind of designed and developed and bred and whatever, you know, so it is much stronger than it was now. So until there is an evidence base that says that making that lawful isn't going to harm people and cause them all sorts of health issues, including mental health issues going ahead, I think it would be quite a big risk to go beyond where we are now. And I suppose the other thing, you asked about Class A and cannabis, don't forget the sort of bits in the middle. Steroids, Mamba, MDA, Spice.
Absolutely right.
Yeah, those are things that we see also.
Thanks. I can remember as a child in the Vale of Beaver, which is back to late 50s, early 60s, I think the most dangerous thing was a Victory V or a Fisherman's Friend, and that was about it, really. So,
I very much doubt that too. I don't often disagree with you, Chairman, but I think there was more probably going on there than you may have realised.
Willie, I led an innocent life.
Of course, yeah.
Kevin.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I draw your attention to page 61, please? 3.5 and 3.6. I'll link the two together. It's just a point of clarification, if I may, with regards to both. I know about the 880 on 3.6. I'm not quite sure about the 1.4 million on the 3.5. The clarification is it was allocated as surge funding. Does that mean that once the surge is over, the funding stops? And if I link that to 3.6, if I may, so it closes it down, it talks about serious violent crime, etc. But the Violence Reduction Unit is also dealing with violent crime. Will there be a link between the two in future and not potentially a duplication?
When we talk about Violence Reduction Network, I'm sure Grace will be able to deal with that. Yeah, if that's all right.
And the answer to your funding question is we've been given the money. It's a nice problem to have, but as it currently is, it's got to be spent by March the 31st. And there are things it can be spent on and things that it can't, and there are rules about what you can and can't carry out forward. And I want to be really clear, this is a good problem to have. This is a better problem to have than not having the money. But getting a big lump of money that you didn't know you were going to get partway through a year always presents certain challenges. The budget settlement, such as was published the other week, indicates the intention to continue the funding at a national level, but let the Home Office decide who it is sustained with, which is code for we don't know if we're going to get it next year, we don't know if it's going to be distributed differently next year. There is it's there in the big budget, but what if it cascades to us? We don't know, and I'd stress a nice problem to have, and a problem I'd rather have than not having the money. But I can't answer your questions because I don't know.
Elaine's the next question, and then we will move on to page 63, outcomes. Elaine.
Mine's really about I think it's, I don't really know how to say this, but you talk about the drug problem and Class A drugs and stuff like that. In my opinion, it has an effect on the whole community. So if drugs are being, if there's drug dealing going on within a particular area, it does actually affect the whole community. Earlier on in the Crime Commissioner's report, there was a talk about a special unit that sort of dealt with the drug situation. Could you talk to me about that, about how that, what that it is, how that operates? I don't know whether that's... Yes, in the annual report, I'm sorry but it sort of relates to this whole thing about how we deal with this situation. Complex crime. Is that what it is?
The complex crime team are a team who investigate, at the risk of stating the obvious, complex crimes. So they will deal with the inquiries that have got potentially more longevity and more complexity in them for a variety of reasons. So, they are not just looking at stuff around the drugs trade and its criminality, but the reality is there is a chunk of their time that is what they are doing. Also in the annual report, there is mentioned on the top of the page 29 around Lionheart, which I've also mentioned as well, which was a very focused operation to try and get into the drugs trade and the kind of county lines aspect of that. At the bottom of that, there's a mention around drugs experts. I don't know if that's what you meant. So, I mean, there's some evidential bits to that. So to convict somebody of a drugs offence, you have to prove it's drugs. So we have some people who are qualified to do that, and they have to do statements to say this is this, this is that, and if it's Class A, the level of purity it is, because that links to the value, because that then feeds into sentencing. So that's what that talks about, and obviously they kind of understand the drugs markets and what the going rates are, and are able to help us with our intelligence and where to kind of focus our actions.
Thank you very much. I'm being really nice to Charmin now. And then we'll definitely move on to section 4.
My question was in relation to paragraph 3.8 about hate crime offences.
Yeah.
How are hate crime offences recorded? Are they recorded, do they go down to sort of subgroups? So
yes.
70% are racial, and I don't know what the other 30% are. Is there a way of deciphering which groups are especially vulnerable?
I mean, the answer is yes. So they're all broken down into all the groups. So whatever the reason is, so is it because someone's LGBT? What is the motivation that anybody reporting can say, I believe this was motivated because of my skin colour or my sexuality or whatever it is. We also within that capture things like alternative lifestyles and all sorts of things. So absolutely, yes, we've got that detail, and that's kind of what sort of the level below this level would look at. We also have those scrutinised by a panel of lay people. So we also have a scrutiny panel that looks at those and dip samples them and says this, which is people from different communities for different protected characteristics. So, absolutely, we've got all that data to help us understand who's being targeted and when and what it's about. But as you can see here, You know, race related is the biggest chunk. And then we also record hate incidents, so things that aren't. So there's some national rules about what's a crime and what isn't a crime. We also capture what's an incident, so something that's happened that doesn't mean the crime. So we've got a picture to try and impact what we do. So the answer is yes.
Okay, thanks then, Chairman. Moving on then, Simon, if you can take us through outcomes on page 63.
Yeah, positive outcomes have fallen.
Simon, I just noticed you haven't got your microphone on, which means you're not on the...
Yeah. I could hear cheering in the distance. That was good. Yeah. Sorry for the viewer. My office is probably watching, so they're probably relieved. Yeah, headline really, we're doing some work on positive outcomes. The satisfaction stuff is pretty steady, but we do keep working on it and keep looking at it all the time.
Any questions? Outcomes, actually, I think I'm the only one left now, but outcomes is how your predecessor always wanted to be measured by Sir Clive. That was his ruling. Len?
It's not a question, it's more as an observation, because surely, and it applies across a lot of things that we cover collectively, the more positive intervention you have, and the reduction, and we reduce the amount of events, the further away from the line of engagement the residual will become. Therefore, your positive outcomes potentially could go the opposite way. They could actually increase because the people you're trying to have positive outcomes with are actually further away. So for me, it's an interesting statistic, but it has to be held in its context, I would suggest.
Okay, any comments at all?
Well,
obviously just an observation from Les, but you might want to make a comment.
I think the point was made earlier about something else. Within a positive outcome, that could be charged, gone to court, gone to prison for 25 years, or it could be we've applied a restorative justice measure, you've said you're dreadfully sorry, everyone's happy, and we move on. They're quite different things caught in the same kind of walk. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Les. Moving on then to 5 prevention. Have I forgot? Oh, sorry, it's what you...
Just a quick one on the Operation Lionheart and the drug offences that have gone up by 606, but the outcomes seem to have come down. Can we have some breakdown of how much of those have been successful to the prosecution? Because if you remember, in the last time we had a discussion around here about the Crown Prosecution Services not taking some of these issues to full conviction as we would expect or as the public would expect. So where are we with that in terms of taking the positive outcome to conviction on drugs?
Yeah, look, my memory is that's in the annual report, I think, isn't it? A figure in there. I mean, can I say I'll take it away and come back with a current figure? I mean, the kind of thing that goes on with that world is if we see some people dealing in drugs and it goes on the floor and we never prove which one of them had it, it's a drugs offence, but it's not got a detection. So it's kind of counterintuitive because the vast majority of these are people caught in possession. So I'll get the figure was 60-odd% from memory. I'll come back and do 62. I hear from my left.
You're happy at that? Yeah, yeah, excellent. Okay, thanks very much then, members. Page 65, prevention. Simon.
Yeah, I mean, stop and search I touched on the way through. We've been trying to make sure that that is focused. We also do have a scrutiny panel who dip samples because they're all, pretty much all of them are done on body-worn video now. So the scrutiny panel has a look at what we're doing and why we're doing it and how we're doing it and looks at the trends. You can see there that, you know, the biggest increase is searches for drugs, which I go back to what was said earlier, you know, is an issue that concerns communities. And I have to say, some of the contention around stop and search that perhaps other places report, we don't generally see. We try to do it with communities. We try to do it in a very focused way. We have it says the cohesive powers group. It means the coercive powers group. It's the same but different. The coercive powers group look at all the points of intervention that we have where we are using a power. So have we, where we use force, and stop and search is part of that. So it's pretty well scrutinised would be my view, and obviously reported back through the PCC.
Okay, members, no questioners. Recommendation to make comment and note. I'm sure you're all happy with that. So, okay. Thanks very much, members. Moving on to the next agenda item on page 71, agenda item 7, OPCC performance report. Over to you, Lord Burke.
I'm just going to pass on to Chief Executive to, as head of the office, to introduce this report briefly.
Okay, it feels a bit of an anticlimax compared to that tome we've just been through. Of course, we're commissioning, we're not delivery, so these are sort of more commissioning related things. I'm just mindful of the comments made by Elaine and Merenissa about, outcomes and working out how we measure those sorts of things. And I think there's a bit of a journey still to go on in relation to that. We've seen obviously some of the outcomes in relation to the police, but we commission other services, and one of the bits I'd like to add to this report is outcomes in relation to those commissioning reports. So that's the bit that we haven't commented on. It covers the kind of main areas that we focus on. They're mainly office-based. Let me just kind of get my notes. So we've got office business, so you'll see we get a fair bit of correspondence, we get a lot of complaints, we deal with those complaints, we respond to queries. We've got the independent custody visitor scheme. The thing that I was surprised to see in there, and I've never ever seen reported in any performance report before, is that we're on target for our annual leave days. I'm not sure you really needed to know that, but it's good to see we're on target. Obviously, there's a lot of work done in relation to engagement. We do a lot of engagement activities, and our job is to ensure that Lord Bark is out there engaging with the communities, able to respond to communities. What's not reported in there is that we do, and there's a lot of social media around that, we do collect the issues around that, and we do obviously monitor things like satisfaction rates for the police. We don't at the moment have a satisfaction rate for the PCC separately, and maybe that's something further to develop.
Sorry, that was meant to be without the thing on, rather than with it.
So you've got a range of different measures there. The things that I think we could add to this report, and I know this was covered when we met when you met with Lizzie Starr a little while ago, the commissioning side of things. So we do commission a number of different services. We've touched on a few of them earlier. So victim first is one of them, and we do have regular reviews of the progress of that contract. We could put some information in relation to the quality of those reviews because that's pretty good. apart from anything else. We do have some contracts in relation to domestic violence and contracts in relation to drug treatment and so on. And we do have a number of small grants that we monitor, very low-level outcomes, but ensure that something has been achieved as part of them. So it'd be useful to have a kind of summary of those in the report in future. But I don't propose to spend any longer. I'm happy to answer any questions on any of those.
Yeah, thank you very much. Les first.
Thank you, Chair. Annoyingly, this is one of my pets. And the danger of putting information is you invite people to ask questions.
Okay. This sounds ominous.
Well, I would be very concerned at an 8% sickness absence rate in an office environment. So, unless there's a specific person with a long-term issue, I would be quite concerned at an 8% sickness absence rate.
Can I? Yeah, and we are. I need to be a little bit careful how I respond, but yes, there are 2 people with long-term sickness, and that I couldn't tell you exactly how much that accounts for, but I can't really say any more. Okay.
Members, any other comments? It's fairly factual, this report. Okay, so you've had the opportunity to comment, and all we're happy to note. Thank you very much, members. Moving on very quickly then to the next agenda, item 8, people zones. Over to you, Lord Buck.
Thank you very much. I'll pass on to Paul Heinson, who in many ways is the author of people zones. Just to say that I'm absolutely behind the concept. This is a report in very much work in progress. It's early days. These things don't happen quickly, but I would have thought all 3 people zones are doing okay, perhaps not all equally well at this stage, but I think they're making a difference in each of these areas, and that's all I think we could ask for at the moment. Paul, perhaps you can explain better.
Well, I'm grateful to Deborah for mentioning to me in advance. In fact, we had a conversation only on Friday about some of the issues, some of the problematic issues we have in relation to this. And she said perhaps we've overdone the glossiness of this. So I'll give you the unglossy version of how things are. Just to remind you of the background was that we funded a project called Braunston Blues. I think we brought the evaluation of Braunston Blues here. And that was a very successful project, but that was a very well-funded project. That was set up with I can't remember exact details, but basically they had a full-time team of people there doing the work all the time. If you remember, the People's Own concept was cash-free. There was a bid before my time actually brought to the Strategic Partnership Board to fully fund a Braunston Blues version in other parts of the county, and it was very expensive. So the agreement with the Strategic Partnership Board was, yes, we want to take forward this concept, yes, we recognise the value, yes, we think this is the right way to develop, but no, we're not going to fund it. It has to be found from within existing resources, which has been challenging, I have to say. But my personal view here, and backed up by particularly mental health, public health colleagues, is that there are an awful lot of resources in local communities. The trick is in ensuring that those local organisations work effectively together. And Elaine, you commented on that earlier about the ability to kind of weave those things in together more effectively, and that's still a challenge. So that can be a challenge in each of the different areas. I'll go through a couple of the sections. The partnership section, you can see there is an awful lot of activity that's gone on in there. It's pretty well clearly defined. It's been a process that's, I think, particularly in Charnwood, where the system is clear, that we have a people meeting and a place meeting, and we try to make decisions in those areas, and people like Deborah, I know, do attend that. The issue is always getting those people to attend. We do have some stalwart agencies who do a really sterling job, and the police are amongst those. The police are very good at participating, and as are the local authority, certainly in the case of Charnwood. But it hasn't always been an easy ride in relation to that. So one of the things we were discussing on Friday was how we get, and I won't name the agencies, how we get the other agencies to participate, because making decisions, particularly about people, in the absence of people that are managing some of those services, is quite tricky. So that's something that's still being worked on and still developing. We've got a further proposal about how we tie down those clearly defined roles and responsibilities in each of the people's own areas. The other key aspect of the work is to ensure community leadership. So this is not intended to be a done-to service. This is intended to be a done-with service. So the community leadership is a key component of that. We had the meeting, I'm sure Grace will come on to say about it, with the Home Office the other day about the Violence Reduction Network and our plans in relation to that. And it was great to have there one of the community leaders who's really very active in one of the people zones, who really blew them away with her commitment and her energy and enthusiasm. But that isn't always the case in other areas. So getting community leadership is a tricky task, and I can't pretend we've nailed that in all of the areas. We had some work with the Home Office funded the development of an operating model, and the operating model, we've got a draft of it that we're working on at the moment, and that broadly says three things. It says that there is the concept is really sound. It's a really good approach, really well designed, that there is really, really good strategic buy-in, but to make it really work, you've got to get that middle manager, lower level buy-in. You've got to get people to, do it on the ground as well as a sort of strategic commitment. And I think that's where our energies need to go in the future. They identified a couple of obstacles, a couple of other obstacles. One was clearly defining roles and responsibilities. Another was data sharing, which has been a bit of a challenge. There's also a piece of work going on with Loughborough University to conduct an evaluation, and they've designed an evaluation model. And this comes back to the point you were making, Marinissa, about how do you define some of these things, how do you evaluate some of these things, because they're quite tricky. And what they've come up with is an approach which says, have you achieved the goal? So in each of the people zones there is a headline goal, which might be about reducing drug-related behaviours, it might be about violent behaviours, things along those lines, but a clear sort of focus. The other is very much based on community perceptions. What does the community feel? What response have they got to it? And what they've developed below that, which we haven't seen the outcome yet, but is a range of resilience measures for that community as a whole. So levels of homelessness, levels of engagement, levels of public engagement in volunteering activities and so on. So there's a range of those sorts of things. That's how the evaluation, I think that would work well. And they're working on that at the moment. The way forward on people zones actually, I think, lies entirely with Violence Reduction Network. What we've talked about and I've discussed this with Grace, is that the model actually is pretty similar. So in the people zone design, we didn't exactly talk about the public health model, but we talked about something pretty close to it. Our intention is to line it up much more closely now, and to see it as a local variation of or a more intense version of what's happening across the community as a whole. And as I say, much clearer definitions of some areas of work, much clearer roles and responsibilities. So I hope that was the unvarnished version, Deborah, rather than the kind of glossier version that you got in the report. But I've tried to be kind of as open as I can be on that.
Oh, sorry, Deborah's got a number of questions, but I'm going to take each section as it comes, Deborah, so if you can be patient if you have to wait. Sorry. So we turn to page 83, and we'll take the section called background, which is paragraphs 3 to 6. Any questions? Nope. Okay. Next section, developing people's zones, paragraphs 7 to 9. Deborah.
I think a lot of what I want to say is linked, so it's quite difficult for me to pin down, but obviously Paul's just said it's to do with rather than be done to. So the data sharing agreement has been not shared fully or had input from the people zones on the ground into it. So I think that is a bit of an issue, and I think we need to look at that for the data sharing.
Can I take that away? I thought it. I mean, it's been there. It's been my frustration with the data sharing agreement. It's been there for about a year. Getting it signed is difficult. It's had an airing. We have biannual meetings with all the representatives. It's been shared there several times. I think it's been very openly developed. It's just that everyone wants a little bit of extra, or is a bit worried about getting this bit signed off and that bit signed off. But it's certainly been very openly developed. I wouldn't have thought it's been hidden away. I'm happy to go and check that.
So what you're suggesting is, Paul, you'll come back and update us by email at least. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that satisfactory? Yep. Okay. Then Deborah, next one. I think partnerships. Paragraph 10, taking us through to paragraph 14. Recent developments. Oh, sorry. Maranisa.
It's not a question specifically around partnership. The first thing I'd like to say is this is a really interesting programme. And I know you talked a lot about the people zones, and it's the right way to do it because you're actually working in partnership with communities to try and resolve what I would call local issues and try and ensure that the crime is reduced from grassroots onwards, but actually build what I call sustainable communities with good quality of life across the board and contributing to society as a whole. So it's a really interesting, I don't want to use the word initiative because when you use initiative, it'll be there and it'll go next. I suppose for me there are two questions, and it relates to the funding that you talked about, because there is no funding for this, for people zones. And actually, in a way, that might be really positive because you're building something from resources that are already available within the community, as you say, and within organizations. And my question here is, how confident are you? So you are getting, so far as I can understand, your office, the OPCC office, is the one that's the conduit, that's building all those partnerships in the people zones. I suppose my question here is, how sustainable are these partnerships if you decide, actually, you're not going to be at the forefront of this? Have you got within that aspect about sustainability and resilience so that people can continue the work? Because I think that's going to be key to the success of this.
I think that's an absolutely excellent question, and if I can give a similarly unvarnished answer. So we have tomorrow, I won't name the area, but we have an area coming into us to say, look, we'd like to set up the same thing. Can we get on with it? And our advice will be, don't do it unless you've got X, Y, and Z sorted out in advance. And we can't at the moment stretch ourselves to do the coordination, because actually, I'm sure Deborah will agree with this, there's quite a lot of work involved here. I mean, even though it's probably not entirely right to say it's unfunded, because my staff have done a lot of work in relation to this, but it's never quite enough, because there's an awful lot to do and keep on top of. So I think the key thing is to define the roles very, very clearly and to pin people down on those roles, because sometimes people will agree and do something, and when they move on, their replacement doesn't feel quite the same commitment. For me, the key thing is, though, that actually we start with an awful lot of agency activity. As I say, that's been at times mixed, because not everyone wants to sort of stop their day job for a little while and get in there and do the work that's required, but many do to be fair. But the key thing is to get the community itself to take these things on as much as possible. And at the moment, if I'm honest, Marinissa, that's very much personality driven. If you've got a good person who is very keen and they're committed, then they're fantastic. You know, you can get an awful lot done. If you haven't got that, then it's hard to move it off from the agencies, and the agencies still keep control. And I think that's the bit that we've got to develop. You know, how to get that agency, that community buy-in. I mean, Grace will say this when she comes up. We've really emphasised that from the start in relation to the VRN, that there has to be a community dimension to this from the start. And we're bringing in somebody from the community to lead that initiative rather than us taking it on board. Have I answered that question? I think I've answered it. I got a bit distracted. Sorry.
You actually tried your best, but I actually do. I welcome you haven't put any gloss on it, because it is a really difficult area in terms of building what I would call community capacity. But I think the other trick here, which I noticed, and you talked about agencies, a partnership working with a range of agencies, is true empowerment is when they actually let go. So agencies really need to let go as well and share some of that power, and they find that really difficult. So communities then become very suspicious.
Can I just say quickly in response to that? I mean, one of the things that Niven Rennie said when he was doing the input on 6th of August, he said, I think he called it a partnership of the willing, something like that. And he said, look, you know, you're always going to get blockers. Don't try and win every blocker around, work round them. So work with the people who are keen. Don't try and persuade everyone to get stuck in. And that's kind of where I'm coming to, a conclusion I'm coming to. You probably won't get everyone to sign up to everything, but work with those who are keen.
Elaine.
I think this is brilliant, and I love that whole thing, that what you've recognised within this is that there is this local variation. You know, that not every community is going to be the same, and I guess it's that thing about trying to work with those people that know the community, that know what the people are like. And it is really difficult to engage people in certain activities. And also, you know, for me, this whole thing is about claiming the ground, you know, getting the communities to claim the ground and you know, to work with what it is that they know that they're good at. And I guess it's trying to discover what that is. And I'm really excited about this. And just to say, it's me that's coming in tomorrow. And so...
If I could just say, excitement is a word this panel doesn't often use. Yeah.
I do get excited. I will not disclose that.
Thank you. Paul, we're on partnerships, I believe, 10 to 14 just. I'm going to move it on to recent developments and Home Office funding 15 and 16. Okay. Specialist consultancy work 17 to 19. Deborah.
Thank you, Chair. And I don't want anyone to get the wrong impression that I'm not fully behind this, because I think you all know I am 100% behind, and I've spent a lot of time and hours in this as well. The special consultant work on the target operating model, obviously that hasn't been sent out yet, has it? So I wouldn't advise anyone to take a new area on yet until we've got that in place. So have you got any idea when that's going to be shared with all the people zones?
So a company called Process Evolution did the work on it. They've produced a report a month or two ago, a little while ago. That report is very long. We've digested it down into this, which we went through yesterday to try and make it a kind of usable version. And we're still working on that. The aim is to have that ready. Well, the plan was, this may be a bit too far off for you, I don't know. The plan was to get that ready for the next biennial meeting, which I think is in November, so we can go through it and then really kind of properly roll the different, the new operating model out there. And that's the plan. But Deborah, if you want, I can send you the version, the existing version. Yeah, okay.
Okay, perhaps you can send it to you and then he can send round all members. Anything else on 17 to 19, Deborah? No. Okay. Moving on, evaluation 20 to 22. Deborah again, right.
I'm just concerned about what you're planning to evaluate, because we haven't got the target operating model in place yet, and you really need that in place before you start to evaluate and look at the impact. I mean, we've done lots of things on the ground. The sex workers project that we've both funded, the PCC and Charmel Borough Council, has got off the ground. So there's lots of stuff happening, but we've not actually got a model that we're following. So I'm not sure how we're going to evaluate and what we're going to evaluate.
The model they've developed is a mixture of sort of locally defined and area wide. So there's kind of three dimensions I mentioned earlier. One is there's a kind of high level statement for each area which is focused on a specific behaviour. Drugs might be one, violence might be another. But the intention is to keep it as the community led. What does the community want? That's the kind of high level. So what impact have we had on that particular behaviour? The second level is community perceptions and how do communities feel. That's intended to be a before and after. We haven't really done the before, so that makes life a little bit tricky. And the third one is those low-level resilience measures that I mentioned earlier. And again, I can send you that, Deborah, if you want. Okay.
Health sessions 23 to 25. Asset mapping 26 to 28, Deborah.
Has the asset mapping actually been completed? Because I'm unaware of this at all, and that hasn't been shared within the people zones either.
Yeah, I've just checked with my office after we chatted. It's been sent to your people, so it's in draft. It's not a finished version, but it has been sent to your people, and I assume therefore to all the people zones.
Okay. February half-term sporting activities, just one para at 29. Key community links 30 to 34. Communications 35 to 38. Deborah.
Just under paragraph 37 about the neighbourhood alert, that seems to be working really well, especially in Charmwood. Our commander's really promoted that, and I'm just wondering why you've decided to rebadge it as something else, because I think that's just likely to cause confusion. I don't understand why you wouldn't just be using the neighbourhood alert.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't know why. I'll check that and take it back. Makes sense to me. Yeah.
Who took that decision then?
We have got access to the same system. The system, I assume that what we've got is a proposal that hasn't properly taken into account what's happening in Charmwood. So I'll take that back and make sure that's taken into account.
Future plans 39 to 45. Nearly called you Maronisa then, Deborah. Sorry.
Just under 42, a delivery plan for the final stage. I'm just a bit confused what that means by the final stage. Does that mean that the PCC is going to be pulling out of people's zones and for the commuters to carry on? It just seems a bit of a weird statement.
Just unfortunate wording. It just means that, kind of getting the kind of next level development of it, implementing the operating model. That's all.
And finally, conclusion 46 to 48. Deborah.
I just want an overall conclusion, and I just want to reaffirm that I am fully behind this. Because I'm sounding very negative today, but I don't mean to be. But I want to get this right, and I want it to go forward, and I want it to be rolled out across all the areas that it's needed to. So just picking up on something that you did say, Paul, following up a conversation before, that obviously the violent reduction network's coming out. We've had the training about the adverse child experiences, the ACEs, the people zones, and I just think we probably need to take a step back and relook at people zones and just see how we badge this, whether we need a public health approach towards the people zones a bit more. And I just think we need to just take a breath and just look at all that in one go, because what we don't want to do is keep duplicating the same thing over and over again and see if there's any way all this can work in one way.
Can I just, that absolutely aligns with what we discussed. The reason this hasn't come out is it seems perfectly logical to align this operating model with the violence reduction network and make sure that's properly in tune before we roll it out. It all fits, it all the same sort of principles, same sort of approach. It's very much prevention focused. It doesn't. It seemed to me it would confuse people if we sent this out, before we'd done that bit of kind of fine-tuning to make sure it does properly tie into the violence reduction network, and we just haven't done that, Deborah, if I'm honest. So I think you and I would be in exactly the same view, that there ought to be one thing rather than two different things, and we just need to make sure that's tied in before we issue this.
Okay, Kevin.
I'll be guided by you, Chair, because I wanted to go back, and it's my fault that I've missed the future plans. I was trying to formulate a question which links even further back. So with your permission, if I could ask a question again on future plans 4.2, which has already been alluded to with regards to the alarm bells went up when it says the final stages. And I linked it back then to page 85 when you talk about the grant funding from the Home Office, which was part of the serious violence intervention funding, which is short-lived funding, and we don't know whether that's going to be continued. Does that apply to this? Is the funding going to continue? That's the final stage. You've explained it, but I thought it was linked to the budget.
There are
budget's not longevity.
Two different things there. So that the funding for the violence reduction network is referred to in the performance report, the 880,000. This is a separate fund. As always, it comes with a very tight timescale. So it says here we got it in February 2019. We had to spend it by the end of March 2019. That gives you an indication of the kind of challenge that was around there. And while we, so the process evolution work, the asset mapping, all that work was done under that fund in a very big hurry. But yeah, they're two separate funds. They're not the same thing.
Sorry, does that mean that the funding will continue after the March, or because it's part of that funding that we're referring to, it's got to be spent by the 31st of March? Will this people's zone be funded after that?
Yes, no. That funding was a one-off bit of funding from the Home Office to develop the operating model, the evaluation scheme, the asset mapping. That has been spent. But the ongoing development of people's zones in relation to Violence Reduction Network would fit in with the new funding regime under the Violence Reduction Network. That, at the moment, is set to run until March next year, and we don't know what the future holds. That's the...
Yeah. Well, thanks very much, members.
Chair, I wonder if I could just say something very quickly? I know I'd be very... I absolutely welcome the fact Deborah's asked these questions. I mean, this is something that really needs scrutiny, and it's had scrutiny today in a really proper way. And I know, because we work quite closely together on perhaps one of the biggest schemes so far, which is this one in Loughborough, that Deborah's absolutely behind this. So she's nothing to apologise for. It's great. But I do think there's a kind of P with a small p political question here, and that is about my successor, whoever that turns out to be. It's going to be important, it seems to me, that that person is also as committed to this people's zones idea as the present regime is, because that's the other way it could just disappear off the map. And I think that's something I'm going to try and persuade whoever it is, all the candidates, to sort of commit themselves to this, or something like it. But of course, has to be said, whoever it is will be able to do exactly what they please in terms of something of a scheme like this.
Thanks very much, Lord Burke. We have two candidates declared at this moment, don't we? So I'm sure there'll be more. Les.
And with Lord Bark, that's the important bit. It's got to be a programme and not an initiative.
Okay, members, thank you very much. You all have the opportunity to comment and ask you all to note, please. Thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item 9, Violence Reduction Unit. Yes, that's right. Lord Bark. Oh.
Chair, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Grace Strong to the board. Grace has a fantastic CV in this whole area that we're talking about. I think many years in probation and survived it. And we were absolutely delighted that she's agreed to be the director of the New Violence Reduction Network, as we're calling it. And I know she's going to speak to her paper with your permission now.
Welcome, Grace.
Thank you,
we
Chair.
look forward to your report.
Thank you, and thanks for the introduction, Lord Back. The report was actually written by Paul Hindson, but now I'm in post, I thought I would talk to it. And things are moving very quickly within the Violence Reduction Network. Things are changing on a daily basis. So as I take you through, I will try and make it as up to date as possible. I think the first thing to emphasise is that the OPCC, alongside the police and public health departments from both the city and council, have been working for over 6 months now developing a public health approach to violence. And I know, looking around the panel, many of you were at the event on the 6th of August where the director of the Violence Reduction Unit up in Scotland came to speak, and the plans were put before the Strategic Partnership Board at that point. Just before that event, the Home Office contacted the OPCC, inviting them to bid for a sum of money to the value of £880,000 to set up a violence reduction unit. So I suppose my point is that the work was already underway, and then this invitation from the Home Office came. The OPCC bid for the funds, and given that I'm sat here today, we're clearly successful, and we're now in the process of establishing the Violence Reduction Unit in Leicestershire and Rutland. Before I take you through kind of the main areas of progress so far, there's just 2 things I think are worthy of noting. The first one is the initial focus of the network is youth serious violence in public places, and in particular violence that involves weapons. Sadly, the events over the weekend in St Matthews, where a young man lost his life, highlights the need for this focus, and in my mind the critical importance of making sure that the Violence Reduction Network has the impact that we would all like it to have. However, the evidence suggests that we shouldn't just focus on one particular type of violence. So the work that we'll undertake in the early weeks and months of the network will be scoping out what other forms of violence that the network should focus on. And that's largely based on the fact that the causes of violence, no matter what the type, are common across those different types of violence, as are the impacts, the consequences, as well as the risk and protective factors as well. So although we have that initial focus, which I absolutely believe is the right focus, we do need to look at how that expands out during the life course of the Violence Reduction Network. And then the second thing to note, which there's already been a fair amount of discussion over, is that the funding, that £880,000, is short term. So it has to be spent by the 31st of March. So a real challenge for me in the network is using the funds that we have in this short period of time with long-term sustainability in mind. This is about adopting a public health approach, which by its very nature is long-term, and also has an unwavering focus on prevention. So what I need to make sure is, although there will be some short-term goals, that the focus remains very firmly on the long-term plans in terms of violence reduction. So just to take you through some key parts of the paper, the design of the Violence Reduction Unit is included in Annex A. So that was what was shared at the event on the 6th of August, and there isn't a huge amount of change to that. We're just currently working on implementing it. It's being run as a programme, so I have a programme manager who's due to start with us on Monday, and the Violence Reduction Programme Board has met for the first time recently, and that was to talk about the vision, the mission and the principles of the network. The vision, which is yet to be confirmed 100%, but basically focuses around making Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland the safest place to live and raise a family. And within that initial programme board meeting, it was recognised that the vision can only be realised with a long-term commitment of agencies and, crucially, communities as well. And given that, we've decided to call our particular unit in Leicestershire and Rutland a Violence Reduction Network, to really highlight the fact that it has to be a collaboration between a number of different partners, and we very much view communities as part of that network. In terms of the governance meeting structure, that is also outlined in Annex A. Something that we're discussing at the moment is how can we make sure that communities are central to that governance. So that's currently something that Paul said earlier is under design at this very early stage. And we're already starting to engage with communities about the actual design of the violence reduction network. Communities very much need to be involved in defining what the problem is in a particular community in relation to serious violence, but also involved in the co-design and the co-delivery in many instances of the solutions as well. My main focus over the last few weeks or so has been putting the central team together. So although we're referring to it as a violence reduction network, some of those funds will be used on personnel who will work as a central team who will support and enable the network as a whole. And so far, myself is in post, and I also have someone in post to lead on service design and implementation. As I said earlier, we have a programme manager starting this Monday, and we also have identified someone to lead community engagement. Again, heart of a public health approach is the community, and therefore it needs to be at the heart of the violence reduction network too. And just picking up on something that was discussed earlier, peer and community mentoring will feature in the violence reduction network. That's something that we'll look at designing very early on, and I think is an example of where we can use these short-term funds to actually do that upfront investment, which will become more economical to run over time. And certainly my own experience in peer mentoring, that does bear fruit if you're able to put that upfront investment in place. In terms of service mapping, just before I came here, I had an email with the final service mapping that was undertaken. That's been going on for the last 6 months or so. I will have a look at that and then share it with partners. That exercise was largely looking at what we know to be effective in violence prevention and what we've currently got in place so that we're better able to identify our gaps locally and make sure that the work of the network focuses on those gaps rather than adding to services that are already in place. A critical part of the programme is analysis and evaluation. We're very interested in some work that the police have already done in developing a tool which allows you to look at different variables in analysing the issues of serious violence. However, the network is very much about building on that work, drawing on data from a number of different sources, so from different partners. And of course, that's going to require very robust information sharing arrangements to be in place. So that's a particular priority for my role, is to work hard on getting those ISAs in place so that we're able to share data more readily and get a richer picture of the problem of serious violence in our area. We're actually taking the approach of commissioning a joint strategic needs assessment, focusing specifically on serious violence across the area. And one of the members of staff that will be joining us on a secondment basis comes from public health, so they will lead that particular area of work. Again, I think that's an example of how we can best use these short-term funds to create a legacy that we can then act upon going forward. In terms of service development and implementation, just for information, the Home Office stipulates that 20% as a minimum of the funds have to be used to commission interventions, which does come as a challenge because of the short-term nature of the funding again. So we need to be careful to do that very responsibly and in a way that tests initiatives rather than sets things up that we can't then continue. So we need to be very mindful of those risks. But the services that we were asked to specify at the time of the application, which we're currently progressing, is the service that runs accident and emergencies, which previously has been referred to as Red Thread. Just to clarify, Red Thread is a provider of that service elsewhere, the nearest area being Nottinghamshire. We'll be looking at a different provider, but the service is very similar. It's about making sure that there's key workers available who can offer advice and support to young people coming into A&E who have experienced some kind of injury arising out of serious violence. The idea being that that's the teachable moment or the moment of crisis where it's an opportunity to intervene and hopefully divert someone from whatever it is that they've become involved in. So that's moving moving at a pace at the moment. The other two services are an expansion of an existing service to engage with young people at risk of violent behaviour, and also a service to enhance the wraparound work supporting police enforcement-based operations. So if there's a police-led operation, looking at what we can do to make sure that the supporting services are in place so that people can be referred to the relevant services. That's what that one's about. However, what I would emphasise is this particular area of the Violence Reduction Network is as much about making sure that the existing services that are in place are well connected, and also that they're as consistent as possible with the evidence of effectiveness around what works in violence prevention. So something we're keen to do in the early weeks and months of the network is come up with our model of effectiveness, which will be available across the partnership, so different services can kind of self-assess with our support if necessary what their prevention offer is and how that fits with the evidence of what works in the world of violence prevention. And then the other areas, which are on page 93, Chair, they're in the earlier stages really. We're only a few weeks in. In terms of campaigns, we need to do some more thought around the best way of approaching that and where to put the investment. Policy integration is a key strand of the Violence Reduction Network, so part of the work will be identifying areas of policy that may frustrate the areas of violence prevention and taking those to the Strategic Partnership Board to make recommendations for change. And then in relation to leadership of the network, as the name suggests, it really needs a distributed model of leadership where we have champions across the different partner organisations, but again, most critically within communities too, and building that capacity and capability to be able to lead this area within lots of different communities across Leicestershire and Rutland. There was a question about surge funding earlier on. I think it was an observation that there's various different initiatives or money coming that's all focusing on serious violence. And just to reassure the panel, I have weekly meetings with a superintendent who leads the spending of the surge funding. So we've already joined up in that respect, and we've already identified, I think it's 3 different areas that we can work in partnership on. So a key part of the network has to be about connection. So I'm very live to that issue, and a big part of my role is making sure that we're certainly not duplicating or adding to the complexity of the system, but we're supporting and making sure that it's as well connected as it can be. So just in summary, an awful lot of work has been undertaken in a very short space of time. As I said at the beginning, a lot of that work was already underway, but it's picked up a pace as a result of getting the Home Office funding. Like Simon said, it's a nice problem to have, but it comes with certain challenges. To date, the response from partners and the communities that I've personally engaged with has been excellent, and there appears to be a strong commitment across Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland to developing the approach, the public health approach that the VRN intends to take. And then finally, in relation to implications, we're currently in the process of identifying risks at the moment, but without a doubt, the biggest immediate risk relates to the short-term nature of that funding. Thank you, Chair.
Well, thank you, Grace. An enthusiastic report. So, obviously, your experience came through really well there. Members, recommendation, as normal, is to discuss and also to note. So I'm going to invite any questions on any section, with it being a relatively short report. So Deborah first.
Thank you, Chair. I'm really looking forward to where this goes, and I've already offered Grace support from Charnwood going forward to try and work in partnership with this. Just one point, obviously, I know this report was written a long time ago, and so but we've got a bit of a mishmash between VRU, VRN, so just going forward, can we make sure that everything's got the right badge on it? Otherwise, we're going to get very confused.
Yes, of course. So from this moment onwards, it's Violence Reduction Network, and we won't mention Red Thread again, other than just now. Yeah.
Okay, I mean, this sounds really an exciting, again, initiative, whatever you want to call it, because I know it's short-term funding, and hopefully it can be sustained. And I think you started off with this vision about Leicester and Leicestershire being the safest place and the best place to live. and let's hope that does happen, but it's just a year that you've got. For me, there are kind of two key observations, and again, I know this is very early days, but one of the aspects here is you use these words interchangeably, using violence reduction and serious violence. Now, maybe there isn't a difference between the two, but there potentially could be. So I suppose just some clarity about what is the ultimate kind of aim in relation to this. And then the second point here is around the people that you've got involved in the network. So partnerships is going to be key. Empowerment and working together in partnership with the communities is going to be key. But communities and the communities we know in Leicester and Leicestershire are very diverse. The last thing that I would want to see is that that diversity is not reflected in what is a very potentially quite an exciting program, but also one, if it's sustained and it's got the resilience for the future, can really reap some rewards for the city and the county as well. Okay? The reason I say this is I've seen all through the reports, Lord Buck, when you come around kind of equality impact, it's always will take it on later on or it's somewhere else. So I think for me, if you really want to be focused around violence, then you're going to be looking at different areas and there are going to be variations in different areas as to what is it that you're trying to aim at and what are the communities, who are the people that are engaged in that sort of crime, but who are the vulnerable victims within that crime as well. So I think it's important that at a very early stage, those issues are taken into account and that diversity is then reflected.
Yes, thank you. I'll note that. I think at this stage, they're exactly the kind of things that we're defining as much as we can, because part of this stage going up to the end of March is also understanding the problems in a lot more depth and diversity.
Okay, Alan.
Thank you, Chairman. If this had come to us a couple of months ago, I would have said that Rutland is the safest place to live anyway, but apparently we're number 2 now, following the Isle of Wight, but there you go. Even though we don't have...
Both areas are police chair, both areas. I just
Yeah.
that out.
Even though we don't suffer much of this, I welcome Grace. I welcome the project. I think it's a wonderful thing. I have no particular questions for Grace. However, for the PCC, I've mentioned this before, I notice on paragraph 14, based via the infrastructure already established around the SPB, page 99, managed through the SPB, page 101, governance through the SPB. And my comment previously has been that I welcome the fact that we're looking for viable partnerships. I know it's one of the strategic objectives, but just a little reminder that when it comes to the local authority membership of that, members decide, officers do, and that includes chief executives. So please don't make the mistake that Health made when they first came out with their STP, did it all through officers, made a hash of it, and now we've got to go back to stage 1.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm not aware of any other questions at all. I presume the Isle of Wight is all down to the groundwork that was done some years ago, is it, Simon? Yeah.
The only possible explanation, Chair. Just to reassure you, my office are watching. They've messaged me to say they were very disappointed they missed that chunk earlier.
Okay.
And the other argument is the Isle of Wight would claim to be the smallest county, but it depends on whether the tide is in or out, and whether you count the coastal strip and coastal waters.
And it's also the largest parliamentary constituency. Yeah. So, anyway, recommended to discuss. We've done that. And note the contents. Yes. Okay. Thanks very much, members. Agenda item 10: modern slavery, human tracking. Lord Bark.
Sorry, the report on modern slavery and human trafficking, I accept that it's very short and probably tells members of the board what they already know. I take you to paragraph 10, where we'll run a social media campaign for a week around Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. paragraph 11.2, which talks about spotting signs. This is a really serious crime that is extremely hard to bring criminals to justice, and we're giving it a real emphasis, and that's why, if you look going back now in the report to the extra number of police officers that they will be involved in this team, that's something that comes out of the precept increase last year and was agreed between the Chief Constable and myself. What we can't hide away from is that this is a real issue, it seems to me, in our patch. It's not elsewhere, it's here. And that's true about the city, and it's true about the county as well. I think people have probably been getting away with treating people as modern slaves for far too long. That's why I think you asked for this report to come to you. And I suspect the establishment of the Enhanced Criminal Exploitation Team, paragraph 15, will make a considerable difference. The £10,000 for the Unseen Modern Slavery helpline that we've helped with funding with, we'll have to see what happens there. But the reluctance to actually complain is, I think, right at the heart of this issue, which is we've got to make it easier all the time for victims of this really serious crime to feel that they can complain without putting themselves at risk. So I present the report to the board. Obviously, got Simon here too. We'll answer any questions, comments. I'm interested in what the board thinks about this.
Thank you, Mark. It's more of an update, really, isn't it? Just a short update. That's what it is. Is there any questions at all? I maybe doubt it somehow, but we certainly all support your comments. Yep. Okay, members, please note the report. Yep. Thank you. Agenda item 11. I'm going to ask Ewan to present this report. Lauren is she on holiday, I think, or she's on leave, that's the phrase, sorry. I understand from Ewan there hasn't been any phone calls or questions on this, but obviously got the opportunity to raise any queries with Ewan after he's finished his report.
Chairman, before Ewan starts, do you want us to stay or to go as far as this item is concerned?
It doesn't really matter.
I know we're being consulted about it. Ewan's we consulted with my office. I think they made some contribution to the final report. But it's up to you whether you want us to stay. Of course we will if you want us to. But I think it's really a matter for your board, isn't it?
It is a matter for the panel only, but having said that, we welcome the contribution your office has made already, and you're welcome to stay, but you also, we understand if you want to take leave. Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Ewan.
Thank you. So the panel's constitution was written in 2012 when the panel was first formed, and obviously a lot has happened since then, so it was well worth a review to make sure that it was still fit for purpose. Since 2012, there's obviously been some other legislation in 2017, particularly in relation to fire and rescue authorities, and also in relation to deputy PCCs. So I've highlighted that in the report. So there has been some amendments proposed by Lauren and myself in relation to that, and just some other smaller matters tidying it up, which are all set out in red in the report. So these are the proposals from Lauren and myself to amend the constitution, but we're ultimately in your hands as to how you want it. Thank you.
I've read through it. I really can't come up with anything at all. So I'm very happy to. Yeah, that's right. I'm very happy to move recommendation at number 16. I do look for a seconder on this occasion, actually. Yeah. I could go through section by section if you really wanted to. If you push me, I will. I look for a second. There's your second, me. Yeah. And I'm also going to read, as it's the Constitution, as it's us, I'm going to ask you to vote on it. All in favour, please raise your hands. Unanimous then. There you go, Ewan. Thank you very much. Well done for your work on that one. Yeah, thanks very much.
How many do they need? Well, I'm not going to worry. Don't you worry about that.
Very hard work. And it's the sort of things that people like myself anyway, somehow we just gloss over, and then there's a bit of trouble, and all of a sudden you're feeding back, aren't you? And then, but thankfully people like you and Lauren and the rest of the officers, we don't make any issues like that. So not very often anyway. Thank you very much. And obviously you'll note, thanks to yourself. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. As I said earlier, there hasn't been any notification of urgent items, and the date of the panel is scheduled. Next panel is on the 11th of December, and it is at County Hall. Emphasise that, at 2 p.m. So thank you very much, members, and safe trip home.